Now, a man we speak to about a great many things. He doesn't always agree with me, which is good. He quite often disagrees with me quite strongly. He is Christopher Snowdon, Head of Lifestyle Economics at the IEA. Christopher, very good morning to you.
Good morning, Mike.
Thanks very much for joining us. I've seen that you've been slightly dismissive, shall we say, of some of the reaction yesterday to what Boris said when he came out and basically told people, rather surprisingly, I thought, that it wasn't anything to do with the vaccines, that we'd managed to control the coronavirus, when plainly it surely has something to do with the vaccine.
Yeah, and he did say it had something to do with it. He said that the vaccine's been very important, but that the lockdown done the bulk of the work, which is quite true. We've seen
he more or less said the lockdown. No, he more or less said it was the lockdown, not the vaccine.
He said it was mainly the lockdown, and that's right. You know, the infection rate's fallen by more than 95% since the start of January, but most of that fall had come by mid-February. The vaccines had a very, very minor impact at that stage. They've had more of an impact in recent weeks, as you would expect. More people have had the second dose, more people have been vaccinated. And so you have seen a divergence between rates amongst the elderly who've been vaccinated and younger people who haven't. So yeah, it's made a difference. And he did acknowledge that, but he was right to say that it's been mainly the lockdown. The vaccines really didn't have anything to do with the rate in decline back in January because not enough people have been vaccinated.
I wonder whether it's got nothing to do with either of those things. And what it has to do with is the way that the virus actually moves about and operates. Because what we've seen over the last year, Christopher, and you and I have had many conversations about this, is that it sort of comes and goes, doesn't it? It ebbs and flows. I mean, for example, we had a massive lockdown in November. And yet in December, we had the worst outbreak that we've ever had.
Well, yeah, we had a lockdown in November, and then we didn't have a lockdown in December.
Well, that's not right, because you can't use the lockdown as an excuse to say you don't feel the benefit of it, because when the lockdown is on and the rates are going up, people say, oh, that's because we haven't had the 3-week lag. 3 weeks after the lockdown finished, right, which meant that everybody had been locked down and therefore weren't infecting anybody. 3 weeks after that, we had the variant which caused thousands of deaths in January.
Yeah, right at the end of that second lockdown, you did have a rise around in Kent, obviously, parts of the southeast, parts of London, as a result, apparently, of the new, more transmissible variant. But I mean, overall, during the second lockdown, rates did fall in the way that you'd expect. They fell in the first one, they've fallen in this one. When there hasn't been a lockdown, generally speaking, with the possible exception of last July, rates have gone up.
Well, July and August, actually. I mean, there wasn't any problem.
It started rising in August, unfortunately.
Yeah, but
it was only very low.
But very low. I mean, there was hardly any cases of coronavirus in London at all in August. I mean, most of the rises took place in September when the schools reopened and when the universities opened.
Yeah, particularly the universities, I think.
Yeah.
But yeah, they've been going up. And if you look around Europe, you know, there isn't a sort of seasonal pattern to this as such. I mean, France continued to see rates go up as ours were dropping very, very quickly. Sweden going up. Hungary at the moment has got really high rates. Over in Uruguay, they've got the highest rates in the world, having had nothing for ages. So yeah, you get these places which seem to be doing well for a while. We were one of them back in the summer last year.
Yeah.
And people start hoping maybe it's all disappeared, but then it kicks off again. You know, the only thing that is going to bring this to an end permanently is the vaccine. I think Boris does acknowledge that. What I guess he was trying to say yesterday was that don't assume that this drop is all down to the vaccine, that we've reached herd immunity and everyone can just, you know, charge around and we should just end all restrictions now. Obviously, he's got his plan. He's got his roadmap that he wants to keep in place. It might be a bit slow for you and I, Mike, but he's got it, and he's not saying he's going to slow things down. In fact, if you listen to his whole speech yesterday's comments to the press yesterday, he made it very clear that, look, we need to be grown up about this. There will be a rise in infections at some point during the rest of the year because half the population still hasn't been vaccinated. But that's not going to put him off ending the restrictions. But he said people will die. People will be hospitalized.
But isn't it interesting, though, because he's so wedded now to SAGE, it's ridiculous. He now literally speaks for them, you know, because he said that before. He said when they reopened the schools, naturally there will be an increase in infections. Well, there wasn't.
No, there wasn't. I mean, SAGE got that wrong. They've got a lot of things wrong. They've backtracked massively on their latest model, which was preposterous, really. The January models that came out of Imperial and Warwick, predicting thousands of deaths a day in the middle of summer, just didn't really pass the smell test. And they backtracked massively on that. There's no accountability for these people. They don't lose their jobs for getting this kind of things wrong. But those models serve their purpose in that they deterred Boris from having a speedier lifting of restrictions than otherwise would be the case. The new models are still relatively scary, but the kind of third wave that's been predicted there is within what Chris Whitty thinks is an acceptable number of people to die, basically, the kind of numbers that you would see in a bad flu season, and not the kind of numbers that would lead to there being another lockdown. I think
they've tapered those a little bit ever since the outrage that came about when they said all 30,000 people are going to die. But let's just have a bit of a listen. It's not all of what you said, Christopher. Let's have a listen to what you said.
The reduction in these numbers, in hospitalisations and in deaths and in infections, has not been achieved by the vaccination programme. People don't, I think, appreciate that it's the lockdown that has been overwhelmingly important in delivering this improvement in the pandemic and in the figures that we're seeing. And so, yes, of course, the vaccination programme has helped, but the bulk of the work in reducing the disease has been done by the lockdown.
Now, my other problem with this, Christopher, is that I've been out and about, as I'm sure you have been as well, throughout this whole period of the lockdown since last March. And I would say that in the last 3 months, the lockdown has been less effective than any other lockdown that we've ever had. There's been more people out and about. There's been more people, even last week before they reopened the pubs on Monday, I drove through Greenwich, and it was as busy as I've ever seen it. It was a nice sunny day. People were out and about. People were walking into shops, going into, buying sandwiches, buying drinks. It was a whole load of people standing outside a fish and chip shop. I think it's not even right to call it a lockdown properly.
Well, why are people complaining about it so much in that case? I think it has been
we're complaining about it because that's what we do. But, I think a lot of people are just getting on with it.
It's been more stringent than the second one. The schools were closed, which is a major thing. I don't know how much effect it actually has on the infection rates, but it stops a lot of people going to work. So it has an indirect effect in that respect. As time's gone on, I'm sure more and more people have kind of started ignoring it, started going around each other's houses. I think that's actually a very good reason why we should be opening pubs and restaurants indoors.
I think there's no doubt that a lot of that is going on.
Yeah, but the lockdown has basically ended. You can't really say that anyone's under a stay-at-home order now. The lockdown has ended. People can still go to the pubs and restaurants. They just have to sit outside, which is a massive nuisance. So we haven't got a lockdown. What we've got really is what we had for a lot of last summer and autumn, which is just the public health people at Sage going to war on the hospitality sector again. And that always seems to drag on longer than the lockdown. Yeah,
it really does. And interestingly enough, when you've got the situation that we currently have, where lots of people are now going out and sitting outside, I think what's happened here is that Boris has seen the pictures from Soho in particular the other night, some of which are in the papers today, where whole streets have been taken over by tables and chairs and lots of people sitting there. And I think Sage have said to him, you better tell them not to do that or else we'll have to lock them all down again. And I think that's what he's running from.
That is quite possibly true. I hadn't thought of that. But yes, these pictures from Soho never really help. I have to say I was in London on Monday and it wasn't like that anywhere I was, right bang in the middle of Westminster. Yeah. Loads of pubs still closed, particularly in London, because it's not just that you can't have people indoors. You have to have outdoor seating, which very few pubs in London actually have because space.
No, there's just not enough space. No, exactly right. But Soho particularly seems to have been able to get the permission from the local council, Westminster, I presume, to basically pedestrianise the streets because it suits their agenda for greenness. And so that's all fine. As long as you can't drive a car up there, you can sit there and have dinner.
Well, you can have a drink, so it swings around about, doesn't it? But Soho is not representative of the country. There's still a huge number of pubs unable to open and won't be able to for more than a month.
And that's the problem, because as you and I have often said, there is a collateral damage problem here. It's not just about public health. When I see that they've set up mobile testing centres outside London Bridge Station, which actually say asymptomatic testing centre. It's almost bizarre to me that they're testing people now who don't have any symptoms of a disease, who may not have the disease, who probably don't have the disease, but they're testing them nonetheless to see whether or not they might have it.
Yeah, I don't know exactly what those centres are for. One of the things they might be for are some of these pilot schemes that are going ahead. I'll be going to the snooker at the Crucible next weekend. And for that, I need to take a lateral flow test before and after. I'll obviously be asymptomatic because presumably I won't have COVID. They're doing a huge amount of testing. Some of it does pay off. I think the testing in schools has probably helped, possibly, but it's all very expensive.
I don't think it has. Well, it's very expensive, and two, what is it proving? What we're finding is the levels of coronavirus in kids is minimal. It's barely there at all. They've tested millions and millions and millions of kids, and they found something like 6,000 of them tested positive, and none of them are ill. So, the reason they're testing them here in London is because Southwark Council has decided that they've found two unusual variants and they want to see whether anybody's got them. But, it's a kind of madness about it.
Oh, well, on that, if this is kind of Lambeth way, I think that there's more rationale for it, because there has been a minor outbreak of the South African variant, which came from somebody coming in from Africa.
Well, maybe we should stop people coming into the country as opposed to testing everybody who's already here.
Well, quite. I think we need to
that would
be a bit
sensible.
tougher on the borders. I mean, that's where we run the risk of throwing away all our success.
Yes.
Is if we get a variant that can evade the vaccine. And we really should be doing more, I think, to control the borders. It won't be popular with everybody. I know a lot of people want to go on holiday this year, but I'd much rather have total freedom within the country.
Well, I mean, exactly. Well, I mean, I don't particularly want either of those things. I'd like to be able to go wherever I want to go, providing that it's safe for me to do so. And I think it is safe for most people who have had a vaccine to go wherever they want. And that's the other thing. Boris has kind of made it seem as though, because perception is everything, that the vaccine hasn't had much to do with any of this, when at the same time, the lockdown that he refers to was allowing something like 50,000 people a week to come in via Heathrow and disappear into the country without being tested anywhere.
Well, yeah, and again, you've got SAGE and the World Health Organization to blame for this. This is some more of their bad advice. Their view was that, if you've got an outbreak in your own country, there's no point in stopping people coming in from other countries. It's just not how it works. I mean, travelers per se is more likely to have it anyway. Probably traveling itself is a big risk for catching COVID. We had a big spike when people came back from Spain last summer. It doesn't really, again, it's one of these things that doesn't pass the smell test with the man in the street, but it's very popular with experts. But I think even SAGE might be rowing back on this a bit. We are doing a bit more in terms of trying to keep people quarantined. This threat of 10 years in prison if you don't self-isolate for 10 years.
Christopher. I mean, it's
10 days.
Absolute cobblers. I mean, particularly now that we're getting some more real information, which the question that we were asking an awful lot last year, how many people are being registered as dying from COVID are actually dying from COVID? It turns out now that 31,000 out of the 127,000 didn't die from COVID. So we're going to have to ratchet that number down, and we're going to have to look again exactly who has actually died from this disease. And what we're going to find is that by far and away the most people who died were elderly in hospital and in care homes.
Yeah, that Telegraph article was a bit misleading, actually. I mean, the figure of, I think it's 77% of people dying of COVID rather than with COVID, that just comes from the last week of data. It comes from death certificates where you get you get an underlying cause and you get a contributing cause.
Yes.
And throughout the second wave, that figure's actually been 90%. And even if it's only a contributing cause, it can still obviously contribute. So it's not as if none of these deaths were in any way COVID. But yeah, of course, you get people who've got cancer and they get COVID, often in hospital. And that figure has gone down in recent weeks from 90% to about 75%. I think actually because of the vaccine. I think the vaccine's been a big part of that. The vaccine can stop people dying of COVID. It obviously can't stop them dying of cancer.
No.
But that hasn't been the story throughout the entire pandemic.
But I think it has been, because there's been no evidence for me for an awful lot of the deaths to have been listed as COVID related. But they've just been put down that way. We know that because people have told us that anecdotally. We've been told by people who've called this show that their parents or their elderly relatives were said to have died from COVID and they knew that they hadn't. And so there's no doubt in my mind that there is plenty of scope for reducing the number of people who died. And there's certainly scope for saying that very, very unlikely cases of people under the age of 50 are going to drive the recovery. And that's what they surely have to do. They can't keep saying, oh, everybody's in danger. We better start testing people in case they might have something that we don't know they've got. The fact is, it's very unlikely for most people who have been vaccinated now to have a very bad illness from COVID. Therefore, let's get on with it, surely.
Well, that's basically what I think. And it's also basically what Boris Johnson thinks. He just wants to do it a bit slower than you or I. He is accepting that people will catch this. We might have a genuine case-demic on our hands in which there's lots of cases, but not many people dying of it because the vaccine is stopping people dying of it. We've got 99% of the vulnerable groups have been offered the vaccine. Nearly all of them have actually taken the vaccine. So I agree, there's not much to worry about. It'd be nice to get second doses in more arms. There's still a little bit of doubt about how effective the first dose is. But yeah, by and large, you're correct. On the people dying of it, it depends how much you trust doctors. Doctors write this death certificates out. We trust them the rest of the time. There might be mistakes made here or there. But I mean, the fact that we have had a very, very large number of people die over the course of the last year or so from COVID is undeniable, and the number of excess deaths proves it. So I think arguing about whether it's an underlying cause or a contributing cause is a bit of a waste of time, really, and we don't know any better than the doctors who are writing.
Well, it's not a waste of time, Christopher, because it's part of the narrative that we've been fed. What is the facts of the matter are these, right? The far and away bulk of people who died were over the age of 82. Well, you would accept that, right?
Well, half of them, because that's the average age.
Well,
So
no,
half
well,
are over
no,
the age of
no,
80.
no. Well, no. 90% of the people who died were over 82.
No, the average age of death from COVID is 82. So by definition, half were over and half were under.
Well, you've still. Well, all right. Let's put it this way then. They're certainly over 75.
I don't know about that.
Well, they are. I mean, they're much more older people died. Hardly anybody under the age. All right, let me go around the other way. How many people under the age of 50 died from COVID?
Very few.
Yeah, thank you. So
I take your general point, but yeah, it's not true to say 90% are over the age of 82.
Well, all right.
But yeah, you're right. It's a primarily a disease of old age, and it's primarily a disease that affects people with underlying health conditions. We've known that since day one.
Exactly. So you can't start punishing the entire population for a year and possibly longer. And as Boris said yesterday, we still have to be vigilant. Well, why? You know, we've all been vaccinated over the age of 50. Right, pretty soon, everybody over the age of 40 will have been vaccinated. And if he's saying you're not safe having been vaccinated, then what the hell are we getting vaccinated for?
Well, I basically agree with you. And that's what Boris has said. And we need to hold his feet to the fire. Matt Hancock said back in January he's going to cry freedom once the vulnerable are being vaccinated. And we still got all these restrictions. Let's just make sure.
He's just crying now at the moment, isn't he? Every time he goes on television, he bursts into tears.
Yes, as some wag said, it was a misquotation. What he actually said was cry freedom.
Exactly, freedom to cry. It is a very bizarre situation, Christopher, though. But can I ask you, finally, before I let you go, to do something more useful than this, are you now against a further lockdown of any kind? Because I can't remember whether you're for them or not now.
I can't see a scenario in which a lockdown be appropriate. It would take the vaccines to fail, basically, in a catastrophic
But they're clearly
way.
working.
No, I mean, I think any further attempt to have a lockdown on the basis that we don't want anyone else to ever die from this, obviously I would be, to taking to the streets against that. I can't see any conceivable scenario in which a lockdown's going to be appropriate. And I think we need to rejoice that Boris Johnson and Chris Whitty almost certainly feel the same way.
Well, let's hope so. Christopher Snowdon, thank you very much indeed. Head of Lifestyle Economics at the Institute of Economic Affairs.